Hello, Bryce.
Hello, Bryce.
I've had my spies go out. I've done a lot of research, and the conclusion I came up with is that you're a jelly donut.
I am a Berliner. That's right.
I've got a friend who, what's funny about we had an email exchange. I had a guy I knew at work, and one time I thought he was talking in metaphor. So I started talking in metaphor. And then partway through, I realized he wasn't talking in metaphor.
That's great. It's wonderful, right? There's a lot
so
of
you started saying the things you were. I'm just like, I'm going to stop because I'm going to go down a rabbit hole.
Right.
Yeah. You're famous or infamous for the 10-foot pole blog.
That's right. I think it's 10 or 11 years now. It's been going strong and full of ennui. So
yes, it sure is. Yeah, it's been what started this, I'll just go ahead and show. A while back I got the Temple of the Blood Moth.
Oh yeah, right.
And it's been brought up a couple of times on the podcast by different people, and also it always comes to, well, I say always, but then it's brought up that your review of it was very glowing of this. And so then it's like, I was like, well, I need to get that guy on. And they thought I met you. And I was like, no, this other guy. It's like, well, why would I not have Bryce come on if he's so willing?
Well, let me answer that because I don't do anything.
That's easy, isn't it?
That's right.
I just was telling somebody, I hope he doesn't review my podcast the way he reviews the modules.
No, absolutely not.
Okay, at least that's the next blog next year, huh?
Right, that's right.
So, I mean, your style is definitely, well, I say style, but I mean, you definitely have well, I guess I gotta say style, panache, a direction, a voice. So, I mean, when you started, I didn't go back to blog number one, but I guess kind of like, is in general, what made you decide to even like go this avenue?
You mean reviewing in general, or the style?
You're like, one day you're like, you know what, as module, I don't know if the first one stunk. Did you say this is so bad I must warn the world?
Absolutely, it did. So, I don't know, 11 years ago, I go to Gen Con. I'm in Indianapolis. Gen Con's here in Indianapolis, convenient. And I just go whole hog and buy, I don't know, $600 worth of adventure modules. And they're all kind of first edition OSR kind of adventure modules. And I'm super excited about them. Online, Dragon's Foot, Knights and Knaves, blogs, everybody talks about how wonderful, module X or Y is. And I get them back and man, they just stink. They're just the worst of the worst. And so I start taking notes about them. And then I think, well, rather than just take notes, I'll post my notes online, right? So the blog is just my own personal notes for me about the adventures. And then over time, it's morphed a little. There were some other people that read the blog and had some suggestions and were like, hey, if you did this, it'd be a little more useful. So I included that as well. So eventually it becomes, or I guess from day one, it starts off as, this is what's bad about this adventure and this is what's good about this adventure. And I think this is probably why it's bad or good for those reasons. And then over time, we add a few things to it, like where you can get it and how much it is and the marketing blurb and a few other things just to make it easier on folks that are reading it. And then inevitably, I repeat myself and say the same things over and over again, because you never know when somebody's coming into this new and fresh and doesn't have the background of either following the blog or my own personal running journey.
Right, that makes sense. And so, do you remember what was the first module you took the microscope to, or the examination of?
I think the first one on the blog might be Green Flame. I think it might be a solo adventure from Pace Setter. But that wasn't the first one that I kind of picked up. I think I may have picked up a few, or I should say, examined critically and thought this is garbage. I think it may have been just some indie adventures from no publisher, and then there were a few of the advanced adventures scattered through there that, as I was going through, I just thought, man, these are not what I was hoping for. This is not what I was looking for. My exhilarating expectations were crushed. Good advanced adventures from the AA line from Expeditious, but the first few I picked up were not good. I didn't start at number one. Number one's great. It's a Matt Finch Pod Caverns. But I think I must have started at like 12 or 13 or 20 or something, and it was just terrible.
Yeah, I think the thing too is, I've thought about this and talked to people. On one hand, I can see both sides. You could say, I guess, because I've kind of been on one side of it. It's like, you work hard, you put something out, and G.K. Chesterton said something to the effect of, it's something worth doing is worth doing poorly. As in, you want to do something, just do it. You know what I mean? Don't wait till it's perfect. And I think, what, somebody's put their heart and their soul, but the other hand too, it's like, there should be a certain level of expectation, and you should hold yourself to a standard. So it's like, I see both sides. It really makes sense. The idea that, maybe don't put things out so quickly. Maybe just think about it a little bit longer. Maybe spend a little more time polishing it.
There's that old saying that real artists ship, right? So you've got to publish. And the only way you get better writing is continuing to write. And you've got to finish a project and move on to the next one, man. Like, you can't keep adding paint to the painting. But at the same time, you're charging people for it, generally. And here I am showing up wide-eyed and, happy, and I buy your garbage. Well, that's not really fair to me, right?
No, it's not.
And yet, as with you, I agree. People need to write, they need to publish, they need to do things. So, we try not to criticize the designer, but rather criticize the work that they've designed.
Right.
You're not a bad person, but man, you wrote something bad. With certain exceptions to that rule, but yeah, absolutely, right? So you've got to write. I would feel terrible if someone was like, there's no way I'm going to write because I don't want to review, right? Well, you've got to expect that shit if you create. If you create, people are going to have opinions on it.
Yeah, and thinking about that, because I used to did the art photography bit, and I remember somebody coming up to me saying, "Well," and I would go to these like farmers markets and art fairs, and one guy came up to me and was remarking about, he kind of thought about doing something, but he was afraid that somebody would tell him, that his pictures were terrible. Right. Well, how many times does anybody go to those events, see something they don't like, and walk up to a person and say they don't like it? And it doesn't happen. Like, you are worried about something that really isn't going to happen, and you let that fear stop you. But even if somebody does, maybe there's something right about, like, with what you're doing. I mean, I look through it, and maybe I don't necessarily say you're exactly right, but you're never wrong either.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was going to go someplace with that. And in particular, so I try to include feedback, right? I try to include if something's wrong, why it's wrong, or if something's right, why it's right. Because I think one of the other things that happens is that designers, particularly new designers, don't get feedback on their work.
Right.
Nobody tells them what's good or what's bad about it or what the expectations are. You look at the vast majority of adventures published, and they'll have no reviews at all, at least none of substance. And you're just left hanging out there. So we at least try to provide some criticism. I would suggest it's constructive criticism. Some people might not agree. And hopefully they take that to heart and do better in the next effort. And I think the vast majority do.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, as people who do create, it is a necessary thing. You're right. You can surround yourself with your buddies, with your parents, with your brother and sister, and tell you what a wonderful job you've done. But you're right. In a sense, somebody's got to eventually say, you could do better here.
I'm not your mom. I'm just the rando that paid $10 for what you made, right?
Because really, I mean, we'll just say that this is a very frank. This is a very frank. The blogs reviews are just very frank. It's not you're not there to be one direction or another. It's just saying this is the way I see it, and this is why I see it the way I see it.
Right.
So I mean, I guess and I don't know that many people have approached it that way, and I'm not sure. There's probably many reasons why, I don't know, but how's that I don't say affected you, but I mean, does that I mean, like the feedback you get or what you think, I mean, how's that come back to you, your style, I guess? Does that make sense? I mean, do you get a sense of people saying, "Yay, you're doing a great thing"? Do you feel like some people are negative towards that approach? Or I mean, what's kind of been your approach as a person who is a very strong,
Sure.
I would say very strong in your opinion. Well, I'll say strong in opinions.
We'll say a strong voice.
Strong voice, yes. Who has a very strong voice?
So there are a couple of things that I think go on. I think it's refreshing to see curation, and I think that's essentially what most people, if they're not reading it for entertainment, they're looking for curation to get a pointer towards something that might be interesting. And I think when you're curating, as I am, with the reviews, people appreciate the frankness, right? They want to know whether this is good or not. You don't want to read between the lines about whether it's good or not. And you want to, in particular, describe why you think it's good or why you think it's bad for a wide range of audience. If somebody doesn't like plot games, or somebody does like plot games, you at least want to get out there, this is a plot adventure. So they know, well, Bryce didn't like it because it was plotty, but I like plotty stuff. So, maybe this is what I want. So even when you give a critical review, you can get an adventure review written in such a way that people that don't agree with you can still find it useful and productive. The number of people that comment critically is relatively small. It tends to be a designer that is very defensive and perhaps much ownership of what they've created, right? You got to create these things and then throw the baby into the ocean, forget about it, and go on to the next one, right? They say the best response to feedback is "thank you for your feedback," right? And then move on, which is true advice. I wouldn't say that I have responded a lot to what people have either liked or disliked about my style. I've taken pointers here and there about things that they'd like to see included in the review. But I will say that there was a great moment early on when I think I gave a critical review of an Alfonso Warden adventure for Expeditious's Advanced Adventures line. And boy, it was just really bad. And I think it was the first review that, I really was like, this is terrible. This is garbage. I mean, there's nothing good about this. And I got a note back that was like, hey, great review. I thought you were one of those guys that liked everything. And this was in the early days, 10 or 11 years ago, when all you saw were glowing reviews of things, because everybody kind of palled a lot around with each other online.
Yeah.
They were all friends, right? So you don't want to write a critical review because you're going to break up those friendships. You're going to have to deal with this designer because they're in your friend group, or they're also on the forum, or they're in your game. But this feedback that I got, that, hey, that kind of let me know that it was okay to be critical and fairly critical of adventures and go on about my way. I wasn't really a part of the forums. I wasn't really a part of this social circle. So I didn't really have to worry about burning down relationships. I had my own thing going on. Again, these were just my notes. I wasn't promoting anything. It was just my notes on what I found in the adventures.
Yeah, I think what you say is very good, because if somebody, I kind of know, well, like say they like or don't like a movie, and then I haven't seen it and I don't know them very well, I'll start naming other movies to triangulate.
Right? I had what was it? There was a guy at work and he was like, this restaurant's great. And I knew that that restaurant was terrible. And I was like, okay, on a scale, when you say this is a magnificent restaurant, the greatest one ever, like, what are you giving that on a 1 to 10? And it was like a 3. Like, and what's Applebee's? Like a 4. I'm like, okay, we've level set now. I know what to expect from you.
Yeah, it's funny. It is really funny because we all have our own experiences and things we like for whatever reasons. And I think I've also, like you said, with your reviews too, it's like I look at something, it's like you're right. And you may look at something and say, well, he's probably right on this. I'll probably need to fix this, but it looks worthy of, because I think sometimes you have even mentioned, you know what, there's some problems with this, but overall it's a great adventure. It just needs a little bit of help. And you're like, okay, I can deal with that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Right. So I'm fairly harsh in my judgments, and have a pretty strict standards, but I also recognize that my um, proclivities are not the same as other people. And you might, if you're looking for a medieval authentic adventure, there's not going to be a lot of those. So if one comes along that's kind of good, maybe you do want to spend the time and effort to memorize it, highlight it, take notes or whatever, right? If the problems aren't too egregious, then maybe it's worthwhile.
Right. But another keep on the borderlands, yeah, it's going to get savaged.
Yeah, almost the same. Right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're now in an age, I mean, because things have changed obviously in 10 years. Zines are becoming more of a thing. I think probably more self-publishing than ever before. I mean, what's your take on stuff that's coming out?
Well, I think it's fabulous. I'm I'm a year late for writing a 10-year retrospective. I was just thinking about that the other day. But we are certainly in the golden age and have been for the last 10 years of adventures. You can imagine there are probably, I don't know, 10, 15 adventures a year that come out that are really good adventures. And you can imagine in 1982 or 1979, if there was a good adventure coming out every single month, you would look back on that and say, this is the greatest time ever. And that's what's going on now. Just the best adventures ever are coming out. Particularly those under OSR-ish kind of banners. There's a lot of room there for whatever the OSR means to you, but that is clearly where there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of understanding about what makes a good game, and people are paying attention to how to make it useful to the DM. I think we are in the best state we have ever been in with seeing adventures coming out. I think the excitement has perhaps waned a little bit as Google Plus died and the blogs kind of have ramped down some. The forums have kind of stagnated a little. I think we are seeing less excitement, less buzz, but the good adventures continue to come out at a really steady pace. Even from the Zine crowd, the Mortorgians, and
Oh yeah.
people, we see good things coming out of there occasionally. So absolutely, we're in the best state we've ever been. This is a fabulous golden age for playing old school D&D.
Yeah, I think what's happened is, in my mind, is a lot of those independent game designers from the aughts, like the Forge, generations later, that same kind of spirit turning itself towards the OSR and
Sure.
saying, you know what, let's just simplify, but yet still take some, imbibe a lot of the sensibilities of the OSR, but also just say, we're not going to be restrained by,
Sure.
people wanting the same old things. But I think you're right. And it astounds me that the number of people who will complain about the direction fifth edition's going and about the directions adventures going. And like, you don't even have to go that neighborhood. You can explore for thousands of years of all this great material. You don't even have to go over there. Why are you complaining about something that's 1,000 miles away? You have to go out of your way to be upset about. It's like,
yeah, absolutely. And I find myself drifting into those thoughts sometimes. I think, you attach the Dungeons and Dragons label to something and it still has meaning. or some of us still think that it has meaning incorrectly. And I think we get a little prickly when we see that and say, no, this isn't Dungeons and Dragons. This is Vampire the Masquerade. But hey, it's chill, right? They're having fun. That's wonderful. It's like looking at, I don't know, Critical Role and thinking that's what D&D is. No, that's something else. They're having a good time though. So,
Yeah.
we'll
But it doesn't affect what's coming out for Old School Essentials.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. We continue to get new players coming in. We continue to get all of these great things. I think there's maybe a little jealousy in the OSR, seeing all of these people engaged in something called D&D that they don't consider D&D, and maybe a desire to have more new players at the table. Right? Everybody wants everyone else to like what they like.
Yeah. And I think I think sometimes to bring a younger crowd, and I've kind of a certain dichotomy with the younger group I would run games with for is, they grew up on anime.
Sure.
So their experiences were, I grew up on Thunder the Barbarian and Elric books. So, it's just different. We're different people, and sometimes people are unwilling to sometimes let the gonzo be gonzo, but it's like,
right.
That's so it's just, I think people just need to be more open, and there'll be young people that want to come our direction, and there'll be older people that want to go their direction, and it's okay.
Yeah, so I will insert some personal opinion here. I think 5e is essentially an activity and not a game. But it's cool. The whole point of everything is just get around with your friends. And for me, get drunk and have fun with them. And whether you're engaged in an activity or a game, it doesn't matter. That's kind of what the whole point of the thing is. And as you say, as I specifically remember an incident where I was running a OSR game at a con, and the 5e tables filled up. They were running Adventure Path or Design, whatever, Adventures League, I guess. Those games filled up. There were people looking for games. They came into my table. Took them about 15 minutes to figure out what was going on. And after 30 minutes, they were setting kids on fire and using them to distract goblins. So they picked the fuck up and, were gleeful players, which is absolutely.
Well, the thing is, to me, what I don't understand as far as 5th edition, and people love it, but what surprised me is the success. It's kind of like in its weird complexity. It's like there's so much things that could have been stripped down and made more simple. And I think there's probably some leftover stuff that could have just been gotten rid of entirely. But they don't because of legacy. But it's just a weird. It's kind of a weird amalgamation. Like OSC, at least you have stat rolls to make your stats meaningful. But a lot of the editions, it doesn't really matter whether you have an 8 strength or a 9 strength or 10 strength or 11 strength. Like, why do we even have those numbers? Why don't we just have a +1, +2, 0, -1? Things like that, which would simplify it. But so I don't know. It's kind of, to me, a weird situation where it's just kind of odd. It seems oddly designed, but it's popular, but it's complicated in a way. It's kind of confusing. I'm not sure how they got by with that and be so popular.
I think they're targeting a specific niche, and I'm absolutely certain, have a marketing department that is on top of it and a market research department that is on top of it. I think they can't drift too far or else they lose the banner of Dungeons and Dragons. But 8 versions from now, I'm sure that the stats will be +1, +2, -1, whatever. And people are having fun with it. That's cool, right? I mean, have fun with it.
Oh yeah, and it probably in some ways it's not really any more complicated and convoluted than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, so yeah, maybe. I think there's also, as I say, they found their niche. There are people that are into rules mastery, right? We saw that in maybe 2nd edition with kits, and then 3rd edition online with min-max builds. And now people seem to like looking in the rule book for a rule, right? And understanding how to maximize whatever. Hey, I got news for you. I'm the dungeon master. Like, rocks will fall if they need to fall. Like, I don't care what the rules are, man.
Rocks fall, people die.
Right? But people get off on that, and that's great, right? They have found
Right.
a spot of rules mastery plus spotlight role playing.
So I played like Moldvay, and then I went to advanced D&D in high school. Then there was a big hiatus, and then I did, when 5th edition came out, I played some 5th. I played just a smattering of 3.5. Didn't like it. So what have you, I mean, like from the beginning, like where'd you start, and like did you follow each progression, or was there a point where you got off the train?
No. So I started with Holmes, switched to Moldvay, went to Metzner. Probably around the time of Moldvay, I inserted a bunch of AD&D into it the way every 12-year-old did at the time, not really understanding these were different games. Followed that through 2nd edition, and then kits and complete whatever books, and then into 3rd, and then 3.5, off to 4. My greatest regret in life is that I poisoned my children by starting them on 4. There was some weird edition after 4 where they revamped shit. I don't know what that was. If I skipped something, that was it. And then switched to 5. Or I shouldn't say switched to 5. So along about 4, I came back to OD&D, basic D&D. And then, of course, picked up 5, because if you want to play D&D publicly, you got to play 5, right? If you want to go to a game store, you play 5. If you're advertising for players, you got to play 5. Or if you want to go to Winter Fantasy and play D&D for 8 days straight, you got to play 5. But my playing of 5 is, I play 5 the way I play basic. I run 5 the way I run basic, which is, I don't really give a shit about the rules, man. We're rolling the hit here.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So are you pretty much like, do you play or run other like non D&D style games, or are you pretty much just tied into the fantasy?
So I used to play extensively many different games. I believe Call of Cthulhu is the greatest convention game ever. Like, I love playing Call of Cthulhu one shots. Tried some campaigns. I don't think they work very well. I'm sure people will have opinions on that.
So why don't you think they work well?
So Call of Cthulhu has a specific problem where in a con game, because it's a one shot, you can get away with doing something that will lead to your character's death.
Yes.
You can push the big red button, you can go down in the basement alone, whatever, because the game's going to end here in 45 minutes, so it's about time for everybody to die anyway. But in a campaign game, you have both the pressure of keeping the group together. Why are you all still doing this shit, right? And kind of keeping your character alive, making intelligent decisions. Hey, like, we should not go down in the basement alone. Well, that's no fun. Like, going down in the basement alone is what makes it fun. Paradoxically, I think Delta Green makes for a terrible convention game, but makes for a great home game, because at that point you have a reason to be together. You're the Delta Green team, and in a con, it works against you because there are things you should do because it's a modern game. We're calling somebody in, right? We're calling our contact at the FBI or whatever. We're doing something that we know we're supposed to do. And when you're supposed to do something, I think it's less fun in a Call of Cthulhu game. So that's specifically why I call it Cthulhu.
Yeah, and I could see that. And I think there's certain games too, you're right, like probably Paranoia is probably, even though I played it, I think at a game store once, but that's probably another one where it's great for a con game, but it's like, it may be hard to say a campaign of Paranoia, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Right. No, I think you're probably right there. Right. So, and I think there are a lot of games that are like that, and they're fun games, right? You have a great time with them, but they can't sustain long-term play. I think maybe Dungeon Crawl Classics is a lot like that. Dungeon Crawl Classics, great for one shots. I think nothing recreates the D&D experience better than Dungeon Crawl Classics, but again, I think it's harder to maintain the pace of a campaign with something like that.
Yeah, because everybody just burns stuff up, but burns stats like left and right when it comes to I don't play it. I don't have the mental bandwidth. I don't have the processing power to run it. I don't think a DCC game, but I sure enjoy playing it.
I've got extensive experience with indie RPGs from the early days of Forge and indie RP. What's the indie RPG store? Whenever that, maybe it's indie RPG. Whenever that shit came out, I was all over that. And famously, that's when I think I was in a Fiasco game, and I wrote an article someplace. I think it's on Fortress Ameritrash, where I was like, this entire genre is empty. It's not a game, it's an activity. I don't want to play an activity, I want to play a game. And so that was essentially the last time I played an indie RPG, or one of the story-based games, I should clarify. Yeah, I still play them every once in a while. If like go into a guy's house and he's got a game in the basement, I'll sit around and play it, but it's not a game, it's an activity.
Well, I mean, I think the thing too, it's like for a pickup, there's something to fill in between game. It's like, and I think it's really, as far as that goes, and that's one I played at a convention. So I think that's another great, I guess we'll say convention activity.
Right. No, and I agree completely. Right. I don't want to come down too hard and sound like this is not cool, because it's fine. But I think you get something different out of it than you do what I would call a game. And as you say, not everybody's there. You're gonna pull out a board game. You're gonna pull out Fiasco. Sure, like we're passing time. And again, the goal is just sit around and have fun with your friends, right?
Yeah, and I think I do agree with you, because that's not something I don't know that anybody would. Well, I shouldn't say. Yeah, probably most people would not want to play that week after week.
Sure, right. Like my first love is science fiction and Gamma World in particular. I am jonesing for a new Gamma World edition. Second edition, third edition of Gamma World are the greatest games ever in the history of the universe. Again, like they're not, campaigns in Gamma World are really short, but you can string them together for a few months, 6 months or so. And during that time, they are absolutely wonderful. I don't write about it much because there's just not a lot of content there. I also think science fiction games are incredibly difficult to run. I don't know how to DM those, so I guess I don't know how to review those. But it is absolutely my first love, is Traveller science fiction games of all times. So.
Yeah, Traveller, I don't play it much, but for whatever reason, it's probably the deepest to my heart is Traveller. I don't know. I still pull out the black book and look at it.
So in college, I played in a Traveller campaign with all of the astrophysics PhD students. And I have a fond memory of them calculating the horizon sight line of a Dyson sphere laser pistol would go before it hit the wall. And I was like, dudes, like, I'm gonna go get some pizza while you spend the next 90 minutes with this math problem out, right? It was fucking an awesome game, though.
Well, what's funny is because so many of these games, we think about being as a game, but they're really games within games, and sometimes games within games within games. And so sometimes character creation is a game. That's kind of a mini game. But for these people, they created another mini game out of this thing.
Yeah, absolutely, right? Traveller is famous for the mini game where your character doesn't. And I think maybe the original Cyberpunk, you could also die in your life path. Not as common as Traveller, man. Like, what are you role playing today? I'm role playing a 78-year-old crippled pilot. That's what I came out with, man. Like,
his intelligence slipping, his strength is failing, his eyesight's terrible. But you know what? He's got vac suit 6. He'll rock on.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Right.
That's kind of funny. And I love Gamma World too. I think the problem is, I think the problem I have with Gamma World is I know what I want it to be. I just don't know that it's like Star Frontiers. Like Star Frontiers, I want to be that art. but the game system isn't that art. And I don't know what it is to make it to that Larry Elmore, or not Larry Elmore, who's the artist? It was Elmore. Maybe it was Elmore. Into that art.
Right.
I don't know how to do that. I don't know that anybody has. But and that same thing with Gamma World. It's like there's a feeling I know I want with it that I don't know how to, you know. And I also find younger generations aren't as excited about this stuff.
I think maybe post-apocalyptic was a symptom of growing up in the nuclear Armageddon age, right?
Yeah, when Russia was a threat, I'm glad they no longer are.
Right. Yeah. I think Game of World works perfectly for like a murder hobo like campaign arc where you start off with spears and then you find a rusty gun and eventually you are like laying waste to the local villages, you know, doing what you do, becoming the new overlord. Right?
I think you're right. But I think the other thing too is with the mutant powers, what makes it weird. I realized, you know, or at least I realized it came to me years later that really mutant Gamma World was really superheroes in a post-apocalyptic world.
I think you're right. I think it's a little bit like that. It's almost I'm not sure what was that movie with like all the superheroes die and like the only superheroes, the Superhero League of Hoboken, maybe something like that. So, you know, you've got these characters that are barely living, but the guy's got life leech and depth field generation, right? So you're ready to go, but like you die when you breathe the oxygen. And so there was this, I think, reputation that it had of it being a comedic game. And I certainly think that it created absurd situations, but every time the designers tried to make humor into Gamma World, or turn Gamma World into a humorous game, they just failed completely. They didn't understand that it wasn't a humorous game, it was an absurdist game. And so anyway, I have strong opinions on Gamma World.
Well, I agree, because I was listening to the designers talk about Gamma World when they designed for 4th edition.
Right.
And they were talking about how, you know, yuck, 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 and this and that, and this and that. And I just thought, you know, when I played in high school, it wasn't yuck, yuck, yuck.
Right.
We played it dead serious. But I thought, well, maybe we didn't get the joke. And so I played in a game with James Ward a few years ago, and he ran a game of whatever it was that he was running. I can't remember what it was. Gamma World. Huh? Yeah. No, it was with cards.
Oh.
He developed it anyway, but it still was Gamma World basically, but with cards, with a deck of cards. And then I realized the way he was running, it's like, no, there was no ha ha. Yeah, right. You got bunnies with guns, but those are bunnies with guns. They're not funny. They're bunnies with guns, and they'll kill you, or they'll take your treasured weapons and turn them to rubber. Ha ha ha. That's the joke.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you mentioned Paranoia earlier. Paranoia has the same problem. I think when Paranoia is played moderately straight, I think it's a fabulous game. And then, because it's absurdist at its heart, but then when you slap in the yucks, it loses what it is, right? As long as you're playing Brazil, or I think the modern version, the latest version, did a great job of like capitalist utopia Paranoia. It's a fabulous absurdist dystopian game. But then when you add I don't know, Orc Street Blues or whatever it was, like it goes downhill fast.
Yeah, I heard they had like didn't have like 3 settings. You could play it like dead serious, or maybe more closer to dead serious, one that's wacky, and then one that's in the middle. Was that true?
That rings a bell, right? I don't think I've ever seen it played dead serious, but I bet you could run a really awesome dead serious game with Paranoia.
Yeah.
Especially
when I play, go ahead.
Especially, I think I'm not super up on where the game is right now, but the last time I checked in with it, it was essentially a Jennifer government game, or you could run it that way. So there were mega corporations, and you were working for Taco Bell, and you know, that was absolutely great. Like the inclusion of corporations into the game.
it's kind of funny. I just was reading where it was Applebee's, some sort of executive was writing how they could utilize the high gas prices to leverage to lower people's pay. It's like,
Right.
it's
Yeah, that's perfect, right? That's totally the sort of absurdist dystopian shit that you went out of a paranoia game.
well, what's also funny is I bought. Did you get the Twilight 2000 game from Free League?
I have not. The newest one, no.
Oh, so they came out and reissued and new rules, and of course, that all the center campaign in the original Twilight 2000 was Poland.
Right.
And here it is. Not a year later, it gets released, and here we are dealing with the Ukraine, which is just bordering, Poland, with Russia invading. It's like, this is just kind of weird, where the gaming and the situation and how things can parallel, and
Right.
maybe even some of the absurdist. I think even with like, a lot of the things we probably feared in the 80s didn't quite turn out the same, but there is still a sense of corporations and lives and masses, and
Yeah.
what are we really here for, and who's serving who. It is kind of weird how the stuff we encapsulate in games and in cultures still actually is true.
The specifics are different, but the themes are universal, right?
Yeah. So do you run so do you have like a group you run games with, or do you stuff online?
Yeah, so I do about 2 in-person games a week. I
I'm
do a total,
jealous.
I do it's a lot of work. I do a total homebrew game, and then I do something called Dungeon Land, which is like a bunch of mega dungeons within 10 miles of each other. So it's all not homebrew. And then I play maybe online twice a month. Um, and then, if, like I said, if I'm at somebody's house and they're having a party and there's a game of Mork Borg or Troika in the basement or Fiasco or whatever the new hotness is, I'll jump into that at a party.
So I've never played Troika. I see the pretty pictures. I don't really understand the mechanics. I think it's supposed to be pretty simple. What's your view of Troika?
I played it like twice now. It's all D&D, right? It's all basic D&D. They just remove some stuff and add some stuff. It's just a little more gonzo and a little more, it's all setting based, right? Mork Borg, Troika, they all push the setting a little bit too. I'm not sure if gonzo is the right word. Maybe a little riffs like. So it's game, right?
Well, and I think too, the value of even people doing stuff I don't care for is, I think the value is people pushing the boundaries will
Oh, yeah.
still have some interesting effects.
Yeah, absolutely. Right.
And I think the it's kind of interesting with Morkborg, is it's kind of like form or function, where the OSC is very much functional, where Morkborg says forget that, it's all form.
Right.
All form. And it's kind of interesting how you can have different takes, where you can take where you can pick up an old school essentials book, and it's very easy to find the rules, it's very clear, and then you get another group says, you know what, we're going to make it hard.
Right. I think they've done some really interesting things, particularly with Mork Borg and layout and design and making the books probably commercially viable because of the art and so on, and the style of the book. But they tend to lack substance. As you say, they're hard to reference, and it's been my experience that most of them have maybe one good idea in them, and they don't know what else to do with the idea. But hey, they publish anyway, which is great. Like I said, you got to publish. They could just spend a little bit more time doing something other than one shots.
But maybe,
2
so
hour.
I've not played it. I don't have the book. I'm just going off of base things I've heard, but it does almost feel like it is kind of lends itself to being not much of a campaign style game, where it really, because I think the world can end at any time, right?
Yeah, I seem to recall something like that. Yeah.
Like especially if you roll double odds twice or something. I can't remember, but have you ever played like Shadow the Demon Lord?
Oh yeah, right.
So at least that one, I've never played a campaign, but my understanding is you play a game, you play a session, and then the second session you're the second level, and you keep going up. And then the cataclysmic event of the demon lord is going to happen at the end, no matter what.
Right.
But you may make it or you may not. But at least that seems to be more structured, still playing to that kind of ghoulish,
Yeah.
maybe not ghoulish, but I'm trying to say without I'm kind of wondering is if maybe Morkborg would have better suited to kind of maybe had a little bit more structure along those lines. Maybe not. Maybe it's perfect the way it is.
You need some sort of arc if you're going to have some sort of sustainability in the game. Most D&D has some arc built in with XP. Shadow of the Demon Lord, you're leveling up once per session, whatever. And some of the indie RPGs just don't have an arc, right? There's no reason to do this again next week. There's no, I hate to sound like a power gamer, but like, what's going on here, right? Like, why am I playing this again? What's in it for me? What's in it for my character? So, which then of course raises the specter of plot and the role of the designer or the DM in a plot-based game. So,
well, but if let's say the reward is you eventually cool stuff, your character gets a little bit cooler each time. The older games, I mean, the XP leveling is much slower.
sure.
And sometimes, like with OSC, I've heard the criticism is that you do go up a level, but maybe you don't really get anything cool. Then you have to go up the next level and you get a +2. It's like there seems to be. I guess the question is, I guess in a sense too, that XP dial also affects that experience. What are your thoughts on that? Should people be getting some cool stuff more often, or is it something that should be a big event when it does happen?
No, you shouldn't be getting cool stuff more often. I mean, you're already getting cool stuff. So, I am an abashed power gamer. I love power game. Oh, I guess not min-maxing, but yeah, give me the hand of Vecna. That's all I want in my life. Every time I find a hand or not, I pluck something off and cut it off and see if it fits. But like this sort of min-max thing where I gained a level and, oh, you didn't give my character anything cool. Well, fuck you. Like, did something cool happen in the game? Did you kill everybody in town? And that's like something that's not following you around.
Check.
Right. So, there are things that go on other than what's on your character sheet, man. And you can have fun and grow with the game without it
Right.
being a +1.
Well, what I find interesting, I do like it where in some games where, like, we'll just pick, for instance, like we'll say Call of Cthulhu,
Mhm.
where maybe they do have a means of leveling up your skills. But let's just say every adventure you can add, maybe you could add plus, you had 10% to add to your skills or 20% to add, but you have to distribute it a certain way. Where every time you do get something, but it may not be huge, but each time there's a little bit of something.
Sure.
I'm wondering to me, I find that's a little more fun as a GM to hand out to people. It's people enjoy it. But of course, maybe they also enjoy leveling up to 5th level and getting Fireball too. I mean, that's kind of a monumental thing too.
Level, right? Everyone's level. Every party was fifth level. Yeah, so I guess I understand what you're saying, but again, I am not overly fond of mechanics. So either mechanics as a player or mechanics as a DM. I'm not overly fond of that. I don't see that as being a particularly appealing part of the game. So mechanics-based rewards are not going to be as appealing to me.
So have you played Dungeon World?
No, I think I reviewed something for it. That's the one with like dungeons everywhere and like mobile dungeons or something. Is that right?
Well, basically, it's the way it works. It's D&D, but using the Powered by the Apocalypse engine.
Mm.
And so the players are the only ones that roll, and 6 or less is a failure where a GM moves against the players. 7 through 9 is a success with a complication. Sometimes you provide the player a couple possible bad outcomes with good outcomes, and 10 plus is success. And it still has hit points, it still does damage, but it's a lot more more on the GM to determine what sort of moves to make against the characters when things go wrong. But I was kind of curious what your thought was.
Story gamer.
But there are rails though.
So, I've mentioned several times the difference between a game and an activity, right? And something like that strikes me as an activity rather than a game. I think D&D, in particular, basic D&D, AD&D, second edition probably also, is a real game. There are rewards. You can win. You win by not dying. You win by leveling up, right? There is an adversary that you are playing against who is sometimes neutral and sometimes an adversary, and your DM. Things happen. You can die. There are penalties. You get turned into rubber or something.
Well, same thing can happen in Dungeon World. You can die. You can die right away easy if it's just my point was it seems to be less. It has mechanics. So there's a combat for mechanics, but still uses a 2d6. Searching a room has 2d6 mechanics, but there's basically like 6 sheets, and those cover everything your character will do. Right. It can all be rolled with a 2d6 and that resolution mechanic. I just was kind of curious because it still has rules, but I do also think it's not, for me, I think it's a good system, but I don't know that it makes great for long-term play. So maybe that's what's the difference between the activity and maybe that's the difference between activity in a game is how long you want to play it.
Could be, right? Particularly when it comes, we're speaking specifically of role-playing games, but yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree with that. I would say yes, if that's the definition, I would say yeah. But anyway, it is interesting, and I think it kind of hits, I think, a good in between where it allows for really interesting, weird stuff to happen, and it's less on. It is a lot more on the GM kind of making determination. It's not determined at the table. It's like, okay, you partially succeeded. Okay, well, these are your 2 options for your partial success. And neither one are great for the player, but there's still a partial success.
Right.
Like, okay, you either fall and take damage, or you fall and you destroy your potion of healing. It's like, you don't die.
This is, yes, I'm sorry, I must be pedantic. This is narrative-based play, right? And I'm not.
Oh, yeah, I would say it is.
I abandoned that 11 years ago as something.
And you never look back.
Well, so what was I doing? I was playing the original edition of Lacuna, the whatever spider and girl from Blue City, and it takes place in the dream world, and like you can do anything. Like, well, if you can do anything, then what the fuck is the point of the game? Like, there are no challenges here. The challenge is I rolled some dice and I rolled either high or low. Okay. And so that kind of ruined the narrative-based games to me. I shouldn't say ruined, but like, you can have fun doing it, just like you can have fun in a Fiasco game, but it's a different sort of fun. So
yeah, I agree. And I think, but I still think it comes down to yeah, I think you're right. And I can't really put a finger on always what makes things more appealing to play long-term versus short-term. And I don't know what it is. I don't know what it triggers in the brain. I don't know what the thing is saying, yeah, I want to see this character go to, through X number of sessions. Or you can just say, you know what, we played 2 sessions. I'm happy. Let's go on to something else. Let's go play Fiasco now.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of interesting. And there's also been a lot of evolutions, but yeah, I agree. And I think, yeah, I agree. I was just trying to think. And I think that the games, and I'm also going to wonder too, is how much of that stuff's going to also interchange with each other and things are going to start morphing in the future. I don't know what the future is going to hold.
Oh, sure.
but it's going to be interesting to see what's happening with all these odds and ends as they fold back into more we'll call mainstream style of play.
Yeah, right. So we can certainly expect game systems and styles to merge, and some of the core concepts from some of these smaller games to merge into others, create new games. Some of it will get abandoned, some of it will get absorbed into larger scale games. Maybe D&D will become a 2d6 system. That happens, right? These things evolve. There's always something that comes along, and that's a good thing, right? I love seeing the freshness, and I love seeing how these indie designers in particular are morphing games for particular styles of play, and how those game mechanics contribute to a style of play. I can still appreciate that. It's just not necessarily something I'm finding a fulfilling outlet.
What I find interesting is how BX has been utilized in many different directions. And from like I picked up Axe, Adventure Conquer King, and boy, it's a lot of bolted on complexity, but there's still some really cool stuff for the characters. But then you can also find stuff like Worlds Without Number. They came out where they took like a traveler skill system and bolted it on. It's like, well, that worked really nice. I mean, it's kind of interesting too, where I think you can even see within the simple systems, people are able to adapt and to change and to take something and add freshness without really, I think, I don't say jeopardize, but without really messing with I think the feel of the mechanics.
Yeah. Sometimes I get a little worried when we start to mess with the core of the mechanics. Wandering monsters, the purpose of wandering monsters, lights, door systems, and so on. But absolutely, I would agree with your core point that BX in particular, because it's so light, lends itself really well to experimentation. This used to happen all the time in the OSR world. Everybody had a house rule. Shields will be sundered, right? You can take a hit and like your shield can get destroyed and you can take a hit, right? Everybody had house rules, and it's the same sort of thing, right? These sorts of bolt-on systems that create extra flavor. So, you imagine somebody sitting around in a game, they took a critical hit, they were like, fuck, I'm gonna die. And the DM said, look, we will destroy your shield and I don't know, break your arm or something, but you don't die. And you're like, oh, that's what I'm doing, right? And so house rule, and like it goes on.
Well, I think the thing is for such a simple mechanic, it really evokes imagery like that. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, cool. And we can all imagine like, hold that shield and just shattering, whether or not it makes any sense in real life, whether it makes any sense, whatever. But in our minds, everybody's like, yeah, that is cool.
It's a game. It's supposed to be fun. It's fun. If it's fun, you should do it.
So. Yeah, but like Axe, I was surprised he threw in. He basically just threw in the 3.5, and I'm forgetting it, where you hit somebody and you kill them, you get to hit somebody else after you kill them.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you get to do that once at a first level. You kill somebody, you can just walk around, somebody's next to them. It's like, well, that's kind of cool. That's a little bit of candy to give to somebody that can make you feel a little special, with your fighter. It's like, I think there's definitely opportunities, but going back, it's like that really is the spirit of us when we were in, going back to our, talking about our teens, where we just started doing these terrible things to perfectly workable games. It's like...
And that's the power of there's that famous quote, whatever, attributed to Gygax and company, that was like, we're not publishing adventures. Why would anyone ever want to buy an adventure? They want to create their own, obviously. But, we want to create our own rules. We want to do these cool things with the game system. It naturally evolves that way because you're having fun. And it absolutely should evolve that way.
Well, I think that's another game, right? That's another game within a game. Like, what can we do with add mechanics to that? I mean, there's a certain amount of enjoyment of just tinkering. I mean, there's just like an infinite amount of tinkering you can do with these things, and it may work out.
It's an interesting idea, and I'm fully supportive of it. But also, I don't think people understand maybe how original D&D, basic D&D actually works, and how tight of a system it actually is. you can imagine every week for 6 years, I shouldn't say every week, every day, for 6 hours a day, there were people in Gygax's basement playing D&D. And over that 6 years and 2,000 days or whatever it was, those systems evolved to be kind of the very tight system, interlocked system that they are today, with slow movement and torches going out and morale and wandering monsters and all these other things that kind of feed off of each other. And so I think experimentation is great. We should absolutely do it. And yet the core of the system is a very tight system. If you get rid of resources, if you don't have to worry about light anymore, or food or encumbrance, that has some implications for other parts of the game. It doesn't mean that encumbrance is a great system. I think everybody hates it, right? Nobody likes tracking light or mapping. And yet they all kind of work together to produce this thing of beauty. And yet, boy, we all tinker with them because they suck. So
yeah, but I think also we're creative, and people are by nature creative, I think. And it's just, I guess, so going back to your high school, so when you guys were doing, what monstrosities did you do? What things did you put together and you say, man, afterwards, that was really a bad idea?
I missed the first part of your question.
Oh, when you're in high school, whenever you were bashing things, like, is there anything that you did that was like a beautiful monstrosity that you look back and you say that was one of the worst, but one of the most beautiful things?
I don't recall anything to that degree. I do recall the very first time playing D&D with Holmes and having the rule book and believing that we had to roll for our armor class. And I rolled a 19, which means you had to roll a 19 or 20 to hit me. My first character I was pleased as Peach to have an armor class that high and not the 4 that my nephew had. So, clearly some misunderstandings there at 8 or 9 years old, 10, whatever I was. I don't remember any bolt on systems. I mean, there's the normal, absolutely, I do remember some. But it was the normal kind of bolting on of using the AD&D books and the BX books in combination. You're using first edition characters and very light rules, which meant BX rules. And then, hey, we're going to take the critical hits table off of Rollmaster in
Well, that was intended that way.
Yeah, absolutely, it was intended that way. And we're going to use that, right? So I think just that's all I can recall. It's been a while.
It has been, but that's why I never understood, because the arms law, claw law, all that kind of stuff was supposed to go with D&D, but I don't know how in the world you're supposed to actually use it. That's part I never really understood when I was, I don't understand as an adult. Like it was that's what it was supposed to do, is replace the normal combat, right?
Sure, right.
Originally the arms law, claw law, that was say, this replaces what you're doing now, but I don't know how you'd replace it in D&D. That's insane. But it
might be interesting to see what the first edition arms law, claws law said, the one that was meant to be a supplement rather than a version of Rollmaster, and see how that integrated in, right?
Yeah, because that's definitely that was his thing. And I think the thing is and that's why I kind of wish I could go back. I mean, I think it seems like almost everybody I talk to that's older, I'll include you in being older too. So even though I'm sure you're only 35, right. Is that, we had infinite time, but now as we're older, we're like, we don't have time for this. We do not have time. We need to get to the point. We need to get to the combat. We need to get to the story. We can't just be spending hours playing around on tables.
Right. We're not spending 4 hours on character development here, guys. No. We're playing D&D tonight.
We are. Well, Bryce, I think we're probably hitting the time-space continuum.
Sounds great. Okay.
And I just want to say I really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a great time. And I say you've been a lot of fun. Because you and I have obviously never conversed before, communicated before. And I've generally found that pretty much most people, if who's into the role playing games, it's usually an easy conversation, and it's an interesting conversation.
Right. So, hey, let me tell you about my character.
Yes, please do. I've been dying to hear it. Yeah, it's kind of funny. But no, again, really, I really do appreciate even I don't necessarily read through all the reviews, but man, I'll tell you what, I do go to that when I go to buy something. I'm like, do a search. It's like, I think the last one was the Ilmeyer.
Oh, Evils of Ilmeyer. Yeah.
Evils of Ilmeyer. And I bought that thing and I realized it is like those noodles. It's in a tight package, and you throw it in the water, it goes shh.
Right? Yeah, that one's a great one. You're absolutely right in your characterization of it. And a lot of adventures, a lot of the really good adventures are like that, right? They are the very best. They're kind of jam-packed with lots of implications, right? This could be something more than it is, and your brain wanders furiously trying to, imagining how you might run it or what you might do with X, Y, and Z.
Well, I also find it's a lot of work to unpack too, because there is no shortage. You are not getting cheated. You are not getting cheated with Evils of Ilmeyer.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's like, I guess the thing what goes to say is there been anything that surprised you recently? I mean, I would think you'd get kind of jaded after a while. Is there anything you're like, wow, this is surprising?
So, I don't think anything specifically comes to mind, but I know that I'm surprised all the time with adventures that I get. And I am delighted when that happens, when something shows up and I'm like, this is going to suck, but I have to pretend like it doesn't suck in order to be excited about it. And then it doesn't suck. It's actually marvelous. There's a Morkborg adventure that just came out that might be the first good Morkborg adventure that I've read that I was pretty excited about.
Do you mind sharing it? Because I had a friend who just did one. I don't know if it's that one or not.
Troll King. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, that's not the one he did. Okay.
Which one did he do?
He did his Kickstarter had to do. I'm not a Morkborg person. It had to do with the ship. It was basically a prison ship. Let me look.
I'm thinking Treasures of the Troll King, but
no, this one was I think is a ghost, it's like a ghost pirate or ghost prison ship. And you were he kind of set up as I think a Batman style adventure, where it's kind of like you have your different villains and prisoners, and you're trying to, I guess, get through this prison ship, and it had a bunch of little bibs and bobs to go with it. I'll see if I can find that.
You should send me the name of it. I'd be thrilled to review
it. I think I know somebody that keeps his mom. You gave him a pretty decent, or you gave him an okay review once. I think he keeps his, I won't tell you who it is, but he keeps the stuff off the drive-through out of fear and trembling.
I'll be happy to go to Itch.
Yeah, what's funny is oh shoot, it's let me think about this. I'll have to look at so I think the thing is like and I think anybody that comes through with it with an okay review, they feel like it's a relief. I mean, it's I think your reviews are so good, but they're so honest, but somebody gets like it was okay, that's like, it's kind of like, it's like going to Board Game Geek and high reviews are like 7. If you're a 7, you've done pretty good.
Right. Yeah, same thing, right? I was in a restaurant once with an ex-wife now, and the waiter came by and said, "How was your food, Bryce?" And I said, "As expected." And he was like, "Oh no, what was wrong?" I was like, "No, nothing's." My ex was like, "No, you don't understand. Nothing's wrong. He expected this to be good. It was as he expected. He is fine."
That's funny. Let me look at it real quick. Morkborg. So I guess the question is, do you know people avoiding you, or as far as reviews, or do people send you? How do you find your stuff? Do people submit? Do you just stalk them, or what?
So people will send me things, and I don't accept submissions, but I might go buy it after they send it to me if I'm going to review it. I troll the new releases on drive-through. I watch what some of the other reviewers are doing. Bones of Contention, Prince of Nothing, Beyond Formal Halt. I watch what they're reviewing. I dig through the Discords and the online forums, all to look for adventures that are coming out. And in particular, adventures that are not hitting drive-through. It's relatively easy to look at drive-through and see what the new releases are. But sometimes some of the more interesting things are not on drive-through, and they're either published independently on the designer's own website, or they're going through itch. Maybe it's a hardcover only on Lulu. Hyquatius Vaults, I think, was a Lulu only thing, and it was absolutely fabulous, right? But you had to know that Knights and Knaves were doing it in order to understand what was going on.
That's hard because, I mean, it is hard. I mean, they each different platforms, what people have done, probably different time periods,
right?
You know, because now and where things wind up, and I know like drive-through, if you ever try and set it up for a print on demand, it's hard. If you go to print something through like Mix'em, it's pretty easy, but you do drive-through, it's tough to set up in that format. And I imagine like Lulu's probably easier. And so people probably go to certain ones because they were done earlier or easier to do. But then again, it's like there's no visibility because places like Itch and places like Lulu, they don't really drive people towards your product.
Right.
But yeah. It's 7 aboard the shackles with the number 7 as a 7. 7 aboard the shackle. And it's bite-sized gaming is one word, is the company.
Okay.
So it's a semi-randomly generated prison crawl adventure is the way it's.
Well, it is on the radar now. As soon as I finish reviewing these contest entries, which will never end, it'll be the next one up.
So you did it. Okay, I guess that's another thing. I probably was stopping early. So you also have a forum, and I didn't really peek around a whole lot. So you've got a forum for adventures. Writing, right?
Yeah. So attached to the blog, I have a link to the Adventure Design Forum. I found that there wasn't really any place to discuss adventure design in the way that I wanted to talk about it. So of course I created my own. But also it was supposed to be a mechanism to keep me beholden to others while I write my book, right? So the whole idea was I was going to post chapters of the book there, and people were going to bitch at me if I wasn't posting chapters of the book. But it kind of morphed into its own community. Again, still based around adventure design, which is great. So yeah, absolutely. There's a forum there. You can find the draft of the book if you look hard enough.
So what is the book?
It's a book on adventure design, of course.
Oh, well, that's what I assumed. Because I noticed on your blog site, you have review standards as well. And some of these have links and some of these don't. And I thought, you know what? These are just general good advice. I mean, they're just a bunch of bullet points, it's just a whole bunch of bullet points, but still it's worth a person's time to go through this.
Right. Yeah. So, one of the things, nobody's born with the knowledge of how to write one of these adventures. At best, you're copying what somebody else did and maybe thinking about it. And everybody keeps making the same mistakes. We say, hey, you should pay attention and kind of figure out how to write an adventure, but like nobody tells you what to do. And you got to go to 1,000 different places to figure out what a good adventure actually is. And I harp about this shit all the time. I was like, I'll write it down, right? But my perfectionism is such that I'm still writing it now 5 years later.
So I guess the question is is the point of the book like that? Is it kind of like something that takes you through like step by step, or is it something that kind of takes you like in some sort of not Hegel, but the circle that kind of keeps going on itself to, I mean, like how's that tool supposed to work? Is it supposed to like guide through each step? Is it supposed to provide guidelines? Is it?
So I don't believe in learning in that way. I believe that you need to understand the concepts, right? So I go through the various concepts, broken down into 3 main categories, and a couple of extra, and then go through important points in those concepts so that ideally someone isn't following a pattern, but is understanding what ease of use actually means for an adventure. So as they are creating their own adventure, they will look at it and say, this is easy to use, or this is not easy to use. This thing I want to do is not as easy to use as I think it should be. More than, hey, follow these steps, here's a checklist.
Right. But I think too, it's like, some of these things too, like just looking through your list, like intelligent creatures will call their buddies for help.
Right.
It's probably good to kind of like, once you've read it, it's like, okay.
Well, so, the book has, the format of the book is that we put that into the appropriate context for its topic. So in this case, it's probably interactivity. You want an interactive adventure, and an intelligent adversary should be responding through an order of battle. What does that mean? So, I'll write 4 or 5 paragraphs on what that means to try to get the core concept across. And then I'll do 2 or 3 examples, either fake examples or examples pulled from things I've reviewed that show maybe some bad examples of this and some good examples.
Somebody's gonna live in infamy.
That's the way the cookie crumbles. Maybe 2 or 3 pointers to online articles on blogs or forums.
Yeah.
Are like follow-up readings, right? So we're going into each point extremely in depth to try to get the concept around. What does it mean? It means more than just calling for backup, right? And so we want to get that concept across to people, because maybe it doesn't apply just to intelligent enemies. Maybe it applies to other areas as well.
Well, I think the thing is, it needs to be logically, I mean,
right.
There's a logic to if something's here and something's happening. I mean, not thinking of this as just being a point to point to point. It's like, what is going on in the environment? Because it's an environment that you're in.
Well, and so then we get into other issues, right? So you're absolutely right. So there must be this sort of plausible deniability. It has to be, it has to keep your attention, and you can't think this is fake. But also, we're not going for realism here, right? Realism is the realm of Napoleonic war gamers. And that's right? You need enough so that people are like, yep, that's the way, that's what's going on. And you don't need more than that, right?
And I think too, it's like, because I've written some stuff, and then now and people would remark, I'm like, yeah, that you got some valid points, but I think it's hard sometimes, even if you're coming up with your own games, just even not written, that you can you can fall into some tropes unknowingly. Like you think you're being clever, but then they figure out the mystery right away. Like it's like,
sure.
You're like, well, how did they do that? Oh my good night. Okay, did it because it made it obvious. It's like, I thought it's interesting for me because I'm very good at picking stuff up in movies, but when I try and do it myself, it's like I'm being too obvious.
So one of the things I like to do when I'm feeling in a shitty mood in a con game or a store game, when we arrive at the village and they say the kid's gone missing, like, tell me about the evil one, he who will not be named, the shunned villager, the evil cult that you had here 30 years ago. What's up with that? There's always a trope involved. And tropes are great. I love tropes. I love the classic stuff. They're great when they're well done, and they're shitty when people don't try.
Well, I prefer, because I think what's dumb is I find like the king has sent you to go investigate such, like, of all the people in the kingdom, why these, instead, why don't you just say, here's some possible ideas. you guys just figure out why you're here. You figure out why it's emotionally important for you to be here for your characters.
I got a
And
great
then,
idea. If the king doesn't have the troops to go take care of this problem himself, then that means that the town is unguarded. Let's take the fucking thing over. It's now my fiefdom. Fuck you.
Well, I remember playing the Descent into Avernus. And I just, the whole time I'm thinking, like, what is my motivation to be doing this? Each step of the way was like, there's no motivation. There's not, these people I'm with, I don't, you like, they're bad people. Why am I with these people? They're the police, but not the police, but you're the police. And then you go down and you can either you rescue the people, but it really doesn't matter whether you take them back safe or it's like,
right.
I am just confused. Why am I even here? Like there was nothing I could even mentally hook my character into. You know, I can go for a lot of stuff. I at least need to have one hook.
Yeah, right. So to a certain extent, it's up to the players to like find their own motivation for the character, but also like you got to throw them a bone, man. Right?
Yeah.
They got to have something to work with, and it, you know, they fall back to the same things. Either you're a hero and a do-gooder, or you got hired to do it. And like both of those are kind of boring. But also I have seen them both very well implemented, right? In a way that makes sense. And so you got to do just enough. You got to give just as I say frequently, you got to give the DM enough to work with as a designer. As the designer, you got to give the player enough that they can then motivate their character, right? And you can't just say it's up to you. Yeah,
right,
sure,
exactly.
it is, but ultimately it is, right? You can always be a stinker, but like give them a little bit, like, man, throw them a bone.
In some games, I think they kind of try and create some during like session 0. I think like the Powered by the Apocalypse or the Dungeon World, like you can write like it's kind of like fill in the blank, but it's kind of more prompts where it's like pick a character to put in this blank, you know, okay, this person owes me a favor and this person, you know, those things can, you know, if you can tie that in with an adventure, just a little something, doesn't have to be major, but it's just like, you know, why can't you say, you know what, you know, one of you has a such and such, and one of you, and just give the players a little bit of opportunity to be creative rather than just shoehorn, but, and then they'll have, yeah, it's just, I don't understand that.
Yeah, I'm both a big believer and not a big believer in character backgrounds, right? I think you should totally have one, but also I think you should create it on the fly. When you find a boat, suddenly, yeah, you know, my dude was a fisherman for 12 years. I know how to row the boat, right? That's true now. So I'm a big fan of this sort of background through play. But also, like, again, this requires two people, or it requires two parties, the DM and the player. Like you got to give the DM something to work with. You can't just be like, I don't want to go on this adventure. Well, then stay in your fucking house or open a dude that doesn't want to go on the adventure.
Right. That's definitely, yeah, somebody being a jerk. And I think too, sometimes we realize, and I think less of convention games. Convention games, you're like, okay, you can't go too crazy, but it seems to me that when you get like a Wizard of the Coast who has, you know, all these funds, and I'm looking at these adventures and like these are terribly written adventures. These are terrible. Like, absolutely. And I don't understand it. I don't understand.
Oh, I'll tell you. You bought the adventure, right? So they made money.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you understand it. Right? They don't have to put out anything good. They're going to write an adventure. It's going to come out. Everybody's going to buy it. Like, why are they putting extra? Like, if it is a good adventure, like, hey, that's great, right? But that's not their goal. Hasbro's goal is increasing my retirement account portfolio. That's what their goal is, right? And like I said, if a good adventure happens to pop out, if a good game happens to pop out, I'm sure they're thrilled. But that's not it. Their goal is to sell you something. They got the brand. They're selling something.
Yeah, it's the Fast and Furious, right?
It's like, it's right. But as you look at it, right, and you see all this great indie work, and you're like, man, why can't they write something good? It's frustrating. Like they've got all this money. They can hire a real editor that does something besides copy edit. They could get a content editor that can provide actual feedback to the adventure, what's good, what's not. Somebody there could figure out how to make this good, but they don't need to, so they don't.
When I have to go out on the internet and find a large OneNote file that actually lines everything out of the adventure of how it's supposed to work,
Right.
made sense of it. I mean, like, why? But the thing is, I find out of D&D, I found even with like the Conan 2D20, it's in some of these others, like there is so much wasted text on nonsense. I need like an outline. Just give me something. Give me a map that's actually useful.
Right. Help me understand how this adventure is supposed to flow. Help me understand who the major characters are. Like maybe it doesn't actually flow that way in play, but at least let me, the DM, know like what to expect as I'm making my way through this 9,000 page adventure.
Right. Why am I having to outline this adventure?
Right. You get your highlighter, you get your notepad, you start making. It's absolutely absurd, right? They are, I think, some of the worst adventures written are official publisher adventures. And
why is it? Because I think it's true everywhere, not just for. Why do you think that is?
Because they're making money.
Because I bought like a Traveler, the Great Rift, and they have this really neat, cool campaign. And a large amount of the page count went to a planet that you only spend a very short amount of time there, and the rest of the place they hardly touch.
So the guy that was writing it was being paid per word, right? And he had one great idea. He wrote that up. He padded it out. He got paid his 3 cents a word, so he made his $20, however little they were paying him. The publisher had what they needed, which was a product to ship out this month because they had a deadline, and the game store or distributor needed something. So boom, out it comes. It's depressing when you think about the business side of it, which is why like the indie scene, I think, is so great. And in fact, I think I reserve my greatest criticism for people who appear to be publishing for profit. So if it looks like you're publishing on a routine basis, like every month or every week, like, man, you're not doing this because you did the best you could. You did this because you wanted an extra $20 for beer money. Like this is not cool. This is essentially, you've turned into one of the major publishers right now. And I think if you are a major publisher or you are a publisher, expectations are higher than if you're just one guy. If you're one guy doing the writing, doing the editing, doing the artwork, doing the design, doing all of this, like I'm going to cut you a little bit of slack, right? Like I'm not going to go on the art super hard, the layout, whatever. But you show up as Wizards of the Coast with a bajillion-dollar Hasbro budget, it's better be a fucking good adventure. And inevitably, it's not. Inevitably, it is worse. It is worse. It's terribly embittering, right?
Well, and I think because we see what they could do, right? You know, I mean, in our mind's eye, we're like, with that budget,
right?
But it does appear that these things are rushed, and I think that's probably the issue. Is I don't know why they're rushed, but they're, yeah. Because I think the thing is, if they were really good adventures, you'd say, you know what, I don't play 5e, but man, this would be a great port over to whatever, and you'd be like happy.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So I think what happens is they give the writer a deadline. The writer delivers on the deadline. They don't deliver early. Whatever the writer delivers is garbage, but they have to take it because they can't go back and say, hey man, you wrote garbage, you need to rework this, because they're already at the deadline. The thing has to go to layout the next week, right? There's no time. I think that's why they look rushed. It's really, really depressing, right? And then also, we all know, most adventures are read, they're never played. So they write these things to appeal to a crowd that is just going to read the adventure, right? That's why you get all the flowery text. That's why you get all this backstory. That's why you get this planet that is fully detailed, because somewhere somebody's masturbating over it, because they're not playing the fucking thing. They're just reading it and dreaming about things. It's like a fantasy travelogue. And that's what most of these are, fantasy travelogues, fantasy histories. It's not an adventure.
Well, because I went to look through some, this is same but different, but I just wanted to do some stuff with some creatures, and I went to read some stuff up with some bestiaries to get some ideas. Actually, the write-ups in some of the D&D, like Mordecaians or whatever. And I thought, oh, there should be some really cool stuff that I can kind of port over to something else. And why they would spend like 4 pages writing about whatever species or whatever, when you distill it down to like what is very evocative or what's core, it's like there's just a lot of writing with not much there. It's like
Absolutely. A lot of writing without much there. I think that describes everything every major publisher has ever done.
yeah, because it's like, wow, it looks like you spent a lot of time talking about, this particular history and this thing, but it's like, as a GM, what have I really learned?
Yeah, there's nothing there to riff on. There's nothing there to use. It's the same with the bestiaries, with the DMAs, but I refer to it as gameable content in my reviews. What's the amount of gameable content versus the amount of padding and fluff that is never going to come up? And you want very high gameable content. It doesn't have to be all gameable, right? I understand a little bit of fluff here and there, but like most of it needs to be gameable. Like, I don't care what the history is unless it was relevant. Like, why did you write 6 pages of history if none of it's relevant to this adventure?
Right. The history should explain why it's important at this moment.
Right. Absolutely. And with the bestiaries, it's the same with setting guides. Like, hey man, you're constant. Like, nobody cares that his eyes are black unless they're jet black and he's got horns and like speaks in a demonic voice. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It is. It is. And I think though that, there's people. So I kind of made a mention to a person. I one thing that kind of revolutionized me, there's a project I was working on, and then I decided to make it like an OSC, but I thought rather than just slap OSC on it, I better read some OSC stuff. And I went through the incandescent grottos, and it's like, I don't know that's a silver bullet, but my goodness, that is a fun way to run an adventure, that format.
Yeah, it's a great format. I love that format.
They do. And I mentioned to a friend about this, and then he was on a podcast and he talked about, about his writing, and I mentioned that, and they're like, oh no, he has a company, his pace setter, and he says he would not make his stuff more terse because people want to read it.
Right. There, I know who pace setter is. I reviewed a bunch of pace setter stuff. Bill Barsh. Yeah, absolutely, right. And so there you go. People want to read it.
So that's his audience. But that's his audience. His audience is people want to read this. They're not going to necessarily run it, but they're going to read it.
And that's how he's making his money. So there's a perfect example right there, right? And you see Gavin's stuff with his formatting that he's doing is clearly made to be run at the table. 2 completely different areas. Both of them, one of them is an adventure. That's Gavin's. The other one is not an adventure. Bill's stuff is not an adventure. It looks like an adventure. He calls it an adventure, but it's a fantasy location. It's a work of fiction that describes a fantasy location.
That was a hot take. I wasn't expecting it. Sorry, Bill, if you're listening.
Well, yeah, like I've reviewed a bunch of Bill's stuff. Some of Bill's stuff is good. Like,
okay.
There are degrees of this, right? I'm
being
a little forceful here on Bill in particular. Like Bill's making money, right? It's okay. That's chill. I wish.
But the thing, he's got an audience, and I think it's the thing is he's got an audience, and that's what they want. But those type of people are not going to be happy with Gavin Norman stuff.
Right. So is it an adventure? Are they both adventures?
It doesn't really matter. I think it's just that
it does when you go buy them.
Well, it does. I agree.
Store and you see 2 things, and they're both labeled adventure, and one of them is made to run at the table, and the other one's made to read. Like, the core thesis of 10-Foot Pole is that one of these is an adventure and one of these isn't an adventure.
I agree with you. I don't know if I would call it adventure, not adventure, but I would say if I'm going to run one, it's going to be the Gavin Norman over the one where I have to go through all this text and
right.
Yeah.
So how far can we drift this? So if I have a shoebox and I shit in this shoebox and I label it an adventure, are you willing to pay $10 for it?
I guess not.
I've got to mark it. Like I'll put it in Barnes and Noble under the aisle, whatever that Warhammer clone is. Perfect, right? So I push it, and I use that example a lot. I feel some of this is disingenuous labeling and disingenuous marketing. I understand it has to be labeled an adventure, because if it's not being labeled an adventure, people won't buy it, right? And yet, maybe it's just a really bad adventure, right? So maybe we allow that, right? It's not an adventure that's good. Well, now it's being listed right up next to Gavin's, right?
Yeah, I agree as far as that goes.
So it's market. So there's a market saturation, right? And you know, I used to say this, right? You've had a shitty day at work today. Your boss yelled at you. You fucked up. You came home in traffic. There was a traffic jam. You're hungry. Your kids are yelling. Your wife's gone. You got people coming over in 20 minutes for a game, and you got shit. You need to buy an adventure. You go looking for adventures. You see 2 of them. Are they actually adventures, or are they not adventures?
Right. Yeah, and I understand, because it goes back to even Pathfinder. I think a lot of their adventures were written knowing that people were never going to run them.
Right.
The vast majority were people going to read them.
I think that's the first. I think Pathfinder is the first time somebody from the publisher actually admitted it, or their statement was quoted in popular forums as, "Hey, you know, we know that people aren't going to read these, aren't going to run these, so we write them for people who are going to read them." Like, that's fucking great. It's not an adventure anymore. Like, you have taken a hammer and said, like, you can't actually use it as a hammer anymore. Like, it looks like a piece of spaghetti. Like, theoretically, you could use it as a hammer, I guess, but like, we're still making bank though, because we're selling a fuck ton of them.
Yeah, they are. And I think that's what's been my frustration, is that there's, on one hand, I get so dissatisfied with published modules.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, whenever I try and run games, they definitely often don't have the breadth that they could if they.
Oh, sure.
And so the thing is, you're like, I want to run a module, an adventure that's somebody else has written, but because I'm not necessarily as good as they are for these things. But then when you go to run it, you can't. And so then you're stuck between, you know, running the stuff that you feel is not really quite as great versus one that you're just running confused and trying to figure out how to handle the situation.
Do I have the website for you, sir?
All righty.
There is a popular blogger, who runs a curation website for old school adventures.
You know what? You know, I'm glad finally, after all these years, somebody came up with that.
Right.
But I tend to also run, run like lots of different games. So,
sure.
But yes.
Well, then you, sir, are in a depressing state of affairs, because adventures for other games are 1,000 times worse than they are for D&D.
Yeah, you're right. You know, because like, you know, I look at like the Traveler adventures of the early ones. It's like, those are terrible.
Right.
And I don't know if it's why, but I think D&D had a dungeon, so it's at least you had something. But here it's like,
well,
Murder Critis, it's like, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this.
I have already stated I don't know how to run science fiction because of their openness, right? The extreme sandbox nature of it. So I understand it's a little harder, but absolutely, it's been my experience that non-fantasy, you're really struggling to find adventures that are decent in any way, shape, or form. It's really, you know, I think I said once that Call of Cthulhu adventures were terrible. Like everybody goes apeshit over Massive Nyarlathotep. It's a fucking nightmare to run. Like it's not written to run. Like, okay, it's a great adventure. It's designed well. It's got an interesting plot, but man, you're going to spend your lifetime reading the thing and highlighting it and taking notes in order to run it. That's not what I want to do. I want to drink some beer and play a game tonight.
I think that's why smaller ventures work where larger ones like the D&D ones don't. I think is also because if you pick a small adventure, it's like whatever the outcome is, whatever the outcome is. But here with larger ones, you have multiple scenarios where there's expectations that people have to follow a certain path and do certain things. And that's, I think, makes it much more of a railroad.
Specifically with adventure paths, I would agree with you, right? Chapter 2 has to be chapter 2 and chapter 3 has to be chapter 3 and Tiamat has to be alive in chapter 20 so that she can show up and be the big bad guy, because that's the name of the adventure path. But also paradoxically, I find that very small adventures generally are not good because they're not given enough room to breathe. There's some middle ground where you need a large enough environment to adventure in to provide room for the players and their characters to leverage the environment. And a very small adventure scope, I don't know, layer dungeons are very popular, 9-room dungeons, 10-room dungeons, these sorts of things tend to be so small that there's not enough room in the environment to maneuver around and leverage it in kind of a sandboxy freeform play manner. You need something a little bit larger, but again, you're right, when you move to these larger scopes, suddenly you need a summary. Suddenly you need an outline. You need things that you don't need in these smaller adventure scopes. And then when you move on to adventure paths, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know how you do that and write one that's not a railroad, but gets you from A to B.
Right, because I mean, especially when you're dealing with characters with motivations, I mean, it's, maybe certain motivations, like, your table, what motivates them. You may have certain characters or players, what will really motivate them, but to write an adventure that will keep people on the same path, motivationally speaking, because more likely than not, they're going to get distracted by something else and want to go do something else. It's like,
right.
and so I think it's weird. I think it comes down to those have to be played like a con game, like a convention game, and that you have to say, you know what, I don't care about anything else. I'm just going to follow the breadcrumbs. We're just all going to agree to follow the breadcrumbs. Okay.
And I say that sometimes, like, hey, you want to play D&D tonight? If you do, then you better go down in the fucking basement, man. Otherwise, we're not playing D&D tonight, right? And so, there's a certain amount of that that's always built into every game, but it's how much does the adventure and the DM and the designer have to push that, right? Ideally, you want an adventure, as you state, where it seems natural for your character to want to go down in the basement rather than having to rely on, look, man, you want to play tonight or do you not want to play? Like, I can pull out. Right?
But maybe maybe the idea is maybe there's a group of there's a what's we're looking for, let's say a group, the words escaping me, it's been a long day, but there's a what's I'm looking for, it's a particular group that's got a certain affiliation, like maybe the police force or a gang. But maybe the idea is maybe you're going to approach it a different way. Maybe instead of fighting him, you're going to try and bribing him. Maybe you're going to take on the leader and try and become king of them and utilize your influence to the city. I mean, there's so many ways that you can still play the game and not try and derail it, but it doesn't allow for, those types of adventures don't allow for that. I mean, to be able to continue on, because
it's actually interesting. In 5th edition, at some point, the Adventurers League had factions that you belonged to. And so they had this idea that, I don't know, you were part of the Druid Nature Boy faction, and they would you would get a separate mission briefing on why they want you to go do this thing, right? And the Lord's Alliance, which was basically the government, right, had a different reason for you. And so they kind of had the right idea in that, look, different people are going to do these things for different reasons. They were all terribly implemented. But they kind of were on the right path of, hey, you know, you can spend in a 200-page book, you can afford one page to give a bunch of kind of motivational things for different types of players.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what I found is they had, so I was never a Forgotten Realms person. And I know in 5th edition, that was kind of that is the default setting.
Right.
And then they would have, in the adventure, they have people from different factions. But I don't know what it meant. Had no clue. No clue what that even meant for the characters. I had no clue. And then they throw these elements in, acting like they're adding some sort of social complexity, where all they did is sow confusion. It's like, I don't know. So what?
Right, exactly. They were all terribly implemented. Like I said, the idea was a good one, right? So the Lord's Alliance was essentially the government. It was the existing power structure, right? Whoever, whether they were the good guys or the bad guys, it was the city council and the mayor and the baron or whatever, right? And he had some motivation. Even it was like, look, man, I don't care if the town burns down, but somebody's paying taxes next year, right? So as long as taxes come in, I don't care. And, you know, you got the nature people, but like they were written as like these monolithic factions instead, you know, with power structures and things, instead of, hey, you know, you're druid, like maybe the animals are sick or something. Like that's very simplistic, but something along those lines, right? There wasn't a lot to them. And they were not presented naturally. Instead, they were presented very rigidly, and maybe still are. I don't know if they still do that.
Yeah, I don't know if they do that or not. And I agree, because I guess the thing is, you're right, because they are monolithic. I guess they're supposed to be across the Forgotten Realm. I don't know. Right. And once a person's a member, it's kind of like, I don't know. But you're right, it doesn't
shape, so the other druids know who you are. Like, what's going on, man? Right.
Well, you know, if you think about it, it kind of goes back to, in some ways, it kind of, like you had Aragorn in the was the Dunedain with the Lord of the Rings. You know, it's like there are people, they knew who they were. There's a certain group. That's cool. But this other stuff, it's like, I don't even know really what it is they're doing. Like, why does that even really matter? I guess you get some sort of affiliation. I guess why are they joining the Shriners? I don't know, because the little bicycles. I don't know.
We all care about nature. Like, like maybe we can try. So that gets to something that pisses me off, particularly in hooks, which is like people not trying. Like, y'all care about nature. Go do it because you care about nature. Like, you're not trying, man. Like, that's like somebody hiring you to do it. There's no nuance there. There's nothing interesting there. You got
it should be a complication.
Yeah, you need
to take that farmer down. He's destroying trees.
Fucking perfect, right? Like, dude is like problematic with his irrigation ditches. He should be putting up these things to keep his fertilizer from running into the creek. The local government passed it 2 weeks ago. He hasn't done it yet. Like, go fuck him up.
Yeah. See, and that's what's kind of interesting. And that's where I think some games systems do it kind of a somewhat good job. But the idea is that, you know, is that characters having certain belief systems in a way that can create complications in the game, and that they willingly, not be forced to, but they willingly embrace that. That's kind of a fun thing. Some games kind of do that pretty well. Some games don't really have a way of doing that. Some people just do it naturally. I mean, as far as the narrative, but that's the fun stuff.
Right. Yeah. Well, and like we were talking about Demon Lord, right? Doesn't Demon Lord do that?
I don't know. I've only played a convention game, and then it was pretty. I don't think I got the Shadows of the Demon Lord experience. I just we're fighting in a we're just fighting a horde of skeletons attack us while we're hiding in a inn.
One of those garbage games. I get Demon Lord confused with another game that was out at the same time that was horror based. It was also D&D-ish. Maybe Demon Lord was the horror game, and I'm thinking of a different one. I don't know. whatever. Demon Lord must have been the horror game. There was another one that was more 4E focused. It doesn't matter, right? But they both same thing, right? They both had these kind of motivational things, and you can see some of that in 5e, where you're a hero, you're a farm boy. Like, okay, but that's kind of boring. Like, let's add some things. Let's riff off of some shit.
Yeah, and I think the thing is if you can set, if maybe everybody has to pick a side, and maybe if you don't pick a side, a faction, that's fine too. But everything has somehow in the adventure would have some sort of bonus and also a complication.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah, go murder the farmer. Like, really, you want me to murder the farmer because he's not fertilizing his fields correctly? That seems extreme. Yeah, I absolutely want you to do that. He's killing the fish. Fish have faces too.
And the erosion. This erosion continues like this.
Why do you believe that a human life is more valuable than a fish?
How many more fish must die?
Right.
Yeah. What effect this will have in 10,000 years, right? We're thinking about the long term, not the short term.
And that's the perfect sort of shit to throw into the game. It's a little absurd, right? So, yeah.
Well, I think it goes back to even clerics. Like, that is, like, to me, could be the most interesting class, but is turned into the most, like, boring class. I mean, you're just a magic user. Like, why does it really mean anything to be a cleric of whatever? I mean,
yeah, right.
There should be something that goes along with it. Positive, should be negative. It's like, okay, you can't just be wandering around just doing whatever you want, just like everybody else is doing.
Right. And so now I'll say something slightly problematic. I don't understand the whole evil thing that the game has morphed into. Like, there is a god of evil. He casts spells. His goal is to destroy the sun. For the purposes of this conversation, let's call the guy that wants to destroy the sun evil. Let's call his followers that are supporting that and attempting to bring that about, let's call them evil also. Right? Like, are they really evil? Well, there is a god of evil. It is palpable. He is the incarnation of evil. I think if somebody needs stabbed, it's the incarnation of evil. Anyway,
it's that simple.
I'm playing a different game though, right? So there's a modernist thing that is going on in D&D, and maybe has been for a few years now, where people bring modern sensibilities into the game, which is fine. It's a different kind of genre, right? And that gets to me not understanding their game and them not understanding my game. Like, no, there's evil. Like, I
think the to me, was it the 8 or 9, whatever it is, thing of alignment that came out with Advanced D&D, I think is just messed up. I really like the law neutral chaos.
Sure.
And maybe law is bad too.
Right. And so what was it? Lamentations of the Flame Princess did that, right? They were like,
did
hey,
they?
Like, almost everybody's neutral. Like, if you're evil, like, we're talking demon evil. And if you're good or lawful or whatever they call it, like, you are angelic good. And like, that's no fun, because like, you spit once in a no spitting zone. Like, time for you to get fucked up. Like, they're both extremist positions.
Well, to me, what law would be, it's going back to Elric.
Yeah.
They are just, it's not good. It is just about order and organization, and it's a opposition to chaos. And, people don't really matter. It's not good. It's just, it is order versus chaos. And it could, to me, that sort of manifestation is like, where you could have having somebody that could be evil, but they maintain order and structure in society, they're lawful, and to try and define good and evil, it's like chaotic good makes no sense to me, because if an elf is chaotic good, how can they have any sort of social structure that is a hierarchy? We've got a princess. Well, okay. It's like, are you chaotic? Shouldn't everybody just be kind of just doing their own thing and just?
Yeah.
but
It's a hereditary position from when all elves were lawful.
yeah, but it's like what is chaotic? We start mashing it up, and I think it's where, you know, even good and evil, it's like they can get kind of messy too.
Sure, right.
You know, and I think it's hard, but we all like things that we can kind of, I guess, pigeonhole and be able to play to.
Right.
So I
It's
don't
easier,
know.
right? So the human brain naturally categorizes things. You want to make sense of the world. That's how you do it. In the real world, we kind of reject that, right? And we say, no, like my predisposition is to feel this way, but like that's not right. Old people are not terrible, maybe, but this is a game world, right? Maybe there is a god of evil. Maybe he does imbue his followers with evilness, and maybe that's all you need to know.
Well, I think that's another thing that's, to me, is interesting, and I would like to maybe read, but the idea is like evil cults. Like,
Oh yeah,
what is the motivation, you know, to join a cult that really is just, I mean, we could look at real world religions and we can, you know, point and say, well, but at least every religion, if you say, well, I think these people are doing bad things, it's like, but they're justifying thinking they're doing a good thing, even if it's, you know, but yet these evil cults are objectively wanting to do evil. What's the motivation for anybody to say, do that?
like we're ripping out hearts to destroy the world. Like, hey man, like, can you give me a little more here? Like, and yeah, you look at real world examples, right? Like a bunch of people took the Kool-Aid in Heaven's Gate and wore the tennis shoes. Like, people get deluded. And the adventures that cover some of that, I think, are some of the better adventures, right? So I seem to remember one that had cultists, and like not all the cultists were on board. Like usually cultists are generic bad guys these days, like they're facelessly evil. But these cultists were like, hey, it's a villager and he's here because there was, you know, they were making pigs tonight. They were like having a pork feast. He was just here for the fish fry, right?
Yeah.
They were like, hey, can you watch the door and collect the money? And he was like, sure, I get free fish if I do that. And you get others that are maybe a little bit involved, and others that are like have signed up, right? That like, yeah, I'm level 26 Scientologist, but there's a spectrum here, right?
Yeah. And I think the thing though is too, it's like, but some of those, I mean, there are just manifestly evil. Like there should be something. I think a lot of things, it's like, I think with real world cults, it's generally like, you know, sense of community, sense of purpose, sense of direction. You know, those are all positive things, but, you know, destroying the world, you know, or being sucked into hell and becoming a servant to some demon, it's like, that doesn't necessarily sound appealing to most people.
Well, it doesn't sound appealing to you. I think it's great. By the way, I'm gonna have to like bail out here. My girlfriend congratulates you on your gay IKEA bag. So
thank you. I don't know that it is, but it is. Yes, it is IKEA bag, and yes, I'll tell her thank you very much.
I absolutely will.
And hey, thank you for hanging with me. It's been an absolute joy.
Sure, absolutely. Talk to you later.
Yes, you will. All right. Thanks again, Bryce.
Bye-bye.